So as we've said, almost half of this country is living in poverty. And there's very little conversation about it. The problems of leaded water, the lack of health care, living wages. We want to know how you contend with the lie of scarcity, people telling us that there isn't enough. We want to know how you will break through the narrative and talk about the issue of poverty, and not just with talk, but with solutions. And we want to know, what will you say to the fact that 53 cents of every discretionary dollar goes to the military and 15 cents goes to education and healthcare and anti-poverty programs combined? What are we going to do about this problem of militarism, the military-industrial complex, and warmongering?
I could not agree more that the biggest lie in American life right now is that we don't have the money. We are the richest society in the history of the world. Our economy is up to $20 trillion plus. And I don't remember anyone saying we don't have the money when it was Wall Street's turn to seek a bailout in 2008. You all remember that? Do you remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street? I sure as hell don't. You remember anyone looking around saying, where's the money going to come from? I don't remember that either. So I could not agree with you more that this is a battle between a mindset of scarcity, which unfortunately is winning in our country, and a mindset of abundance and humanity. Now, why is the mindset of scarcity winning? Because of the reason you're all here today. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Half can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. And so if you say, hey, do something for those people, what's the human response? You know it. They say, like, wait, if they're getting theirs, then that's somehow bad for me. And then if you demonize them, then I'm on board. That is a mindset of scarcity in action. So how do you reverse that? How do you unbrainwash so many of our fellow citizens to the fact that we are the richest society in the history of the world? We can easily afford a dividend of $1,000 a month to help even the playing field. And the way we do that is by getting Americans on board with a vision of the fact that we're all owners and shareholders of this country. Instead of seeing it as like, oh, they're getting something, it's like, no, everyone gets this. It's an income that we all deserve as owners and shareholders. And when a company declares a dividend, when Verizon says, hey, we made some money, so let's give everyone money, everyone applauds management. They say that's great work. And now it is our turn as a country to come together as a democracy and say, we deserve a dividend, and we can make that case very, very strongly to the entire American people.
And would your, just to really quickly follow up, would your dividend be means tested or universal?
So the Freedom Dividend, which is a flagship proposal of my presidential platform, is that it is not means tested. And we're taking a page from Alaska's book, where Alaska gives everyone a dividend. They do not see whether you're employed or what your means are. And then it becomes universally popular. It is impossible to demonize or villainize.
Okay, all right, let's go to an audience question first. We're going to change the order a little bit. Wensler Nosey. All right.
I want to thank you. My name is Wensler Nosey Sr., and I am a former chairman and former councilman of the San Carlos Apache tribe in Arizona. I'm with...
Hi, my name is Janina Gajigiosta Gorman from Pennsylvania, and I am with the Mohawk and Seneca Nations, and my children were taken from me for reasons of poverty in direct violation of the Indian Child Welfare Act.
The first chapter of America Foundation, which includes the devastation of indigenous lives and communities, need to be addressed. The encroachment on indigenous religion is a priority. The National Environmental Protection Act has been continually bypassed by Congress, allowing for desecration of federal trust lands and by foreign corporations. To this day, my people are struggling against poverty and the attack on our sovereign rights guaranteed to us by this government. Our lands are being poisoned and are inconsistent threat from mining and fracking from companies. As president, what will you do to ensure protection of sacred and holy indigenous lands, the lives of Native people, and our tribal sovereignty?
Well, thank you very much for being here. And it's immoral and criminal what has happened in your communities. Like, all of America can see the legacy of the dislocation of Native peoples over the last number of generations. And so I would appoint someone who would respect all of the commitments that we've made to Native peoples. And part of this is around when you talk about the poisoning of your land. The problem is that we're measuring our economic progress in GDP, and then it makes it seem like people are obstacles. What we have to do is we have to actually take your community's health and all Americans' health and use that as the new GDP. Now that seems far out, but GDP is at record highs, and life expectancy has declined for 3 years in a row because of record levels of drug overdoses and suicides. And so if we continue to see people as obstacles, then there's this continuous battle against the grain. It's like, oh, if you respect Native rights, then you're going to somehow be costing some oil company or fracking company money. Instead, we have to change the measurement. We have to say that our children's success, our health, the cleanliness and sanctity of our environments, our clean air and water, our mental health and freedom from substance abuse, that's actually how we measure economic progress, and then protecting your people's rights will be part of that progress.
All right, Bishop Barber.
Thank you so much for being here. And let me just say to all of the people who gather here, you're right, you can clap at the questions that the people ask, and then we listen for the answers that the candidates give. Is that all right? I also want to go back and one more time and do a little housekeeping. If you're not with media that's been assigned, we've asked you to turn off your phones and turn off your Wi-Fi. So right here on this row, are y'all with media? If you're not with media, we'd ask you to take that off and turn it off. It's being live streamed. Anybody else, it helps us with the signal, and it's just going to be provided to everybody. Now, I'm from the Southlands, the Sun Belt. I'm part Tuscaroran, part white, and part black. But the reality is, in America, since 2010, we've had 26 states that have engaged in racist voter suppression and racist gerrymandering laws. That represents something like 54% of all African American people of color, but it also represents states that make up 52 members of the United States Senate and plus 50% of the United States Congress. When we look at the maps, however, and we put up all the states that have engaged in systemic racism as seen through the lens of racist voter suppression, something strange happened. We overlay that, those are the same states with the highest poverty, the highest child poverty, the lowest wages, the lowest lack of health care, the greatest attack on immigrants and the LGBT community. And what we find is that those who get elected through racist voter suppression laws end up passing, blocking, and supporting policies that hurt mostly poor white people. Because there are 26 million poor black people in this country, but 66 million poor white people in this country. So our campaign understands that you can't have a conversation about racism without dealing with poverty, without dealing with ecological devastation, a war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And here's the question of your administration. How will you run and administrate to break through the mythology of the separation of these issues, the mythology that poverty just hurts a small subset of people, i.e. people of color? And how will you help build a coalition in the South of whites, of black, of brown people, of Native? And how will you make sure that if you're running on a party ticket, it does not just follow the polls and say, well, I think we might can win North Carolina, I think we might can go to this state. How will you say to them, no, we have to go to every state and not give up on any state if we're going to change the United States?
Thank you. That question deserves applause. And this echoes what Dr. King was arguing for. He said we need to unite poor people from different backgrounds and let people know that it's not like a race. And look at this group. I mean, you all represent this and reflect this. It's inspiring and invigorating. So I make the case to folks around the country that our economies become punitive and inhuman. And that's not a case that folks, frankly, who watch Fox News see that often, but they actually get it because they see what's going on in their communities. And so I talk about, for example, truckers a lot. There are 3.5 million truck drivers in the United States, and my friends in Silicon Valley are working on trucks that can drive themselves. It's going to be an epic disaster for many, many American workers and communities. And the majority of those truckers are Republicans and white Americans, because that's just who the majority of that group is. And so they've now looked at me and said, wait a minute, he's talking about problems that I actually care deeply about, where we need to build a coalition. And one of the ways that I'm trying to build that coalition is I've been on Fox News a number of times. I think the DNC, and some people here may not agree with that decision, but we need to win a general election. We need to win over Americans from every point in the political spectrum. And so to make my case to Americans, I'll have an honest conversation with anyone, anywhere. We need to make it so that Democrat's not a dirty word in certain parts of the country. And unfortunately, I've been shocked where it has been. I've been talking to a working class American in Ohio or another part of the country, and when I say I'm a Democrat, they like, you can feel this vitriol rising. And to me, Democrats, we're the party of the working class, the working man, the little guy or gal. We need to make that case to the American people.
Well, can I just really quickly follow up, and then I'm going to have Bishop Barber follow up as well. So much of the history of that, the word Democrat becoming a dirty word, had to do with race. You're a person of color yourself. How do you overcome the fact that a lot of the time the opposition is not about the policies? There's broad agreement across people who are in the have-nots about what should be done, about social programs, but there is a barrier that does have to do with this history of racial polarization in the country and racism in the country. What do you do about that?
Well, it's funny, Joy. As you suggest, I'm the son of immigrants myself, and I show up. And there's like a curiosity, at least around my particular identity and background, because I'm going into places that, frankly, it's like you wouldn't necessarily expect. and I've actually found them to be open-minded about the phenomena that I'm describing. You're right that there's been this polarization and extremity that's built up. In part because cable news has found that they make more money, no offense, but they make more money by, catering to particular audiences. Most of the Americans I talk to are very willing to listen to the fact that there is a bigger set of forces here that we should be rallying around together rather than letting us ourselves get divided.
Yeah, I want to just follow up, because one of the things that this campaign is seeing, and you look out here, we don't say, is it race or is it class? We say it is. And right, but by racism, we don't mean cultural racism, because just name calling and because that's not really what we're looking at. We're looking at policy, disparate impact, and trying to help folks to see when you pass a policy that has a disparate impact on black people and people of color, it also has a disparate great impact on poor whites because there's more of them. So here's the question. In 2016, there were 26 televised debates, not forums like this, but televised debates, everybody on the stage. Not 1 hour, not one debate was dedicated to systemic poverty, and not 1 hour was dedicated to systemic racist voter suppression, even though we face voter suppression like we haven't seen since the days of Jim Crow. Will your campaign insist on those that are putting together the debates that there be a debate that focuses on these 5 interlocking injustices: systemic poverty, systemic policy racism, ecological devastation, the war economy, militarism, and how will you do that? Because we believe until we have an interlocking conversation, we're having silo conversation, which further enable people to divide us.
Well, I would be thrilled to have a debate on those topics, and I would advocate to the powers that be, Joy.
I am not the powers that be. I'm just letting you know.
Debate in this, because I couldn't agree with you more that they are all tied together. And one of the messages from my campaign is that poverty has an antidote: money. You know what I mean? Like, or as my friend says, poverty is not an absence of character, it's an absence of cash. And so what we need to do is we need to fix the capital flows in our country, put cash into people's and families' hands, and then would that help with some of the gerrymandering and voter exclusion? Would that help with some of the marginalization, both politically and in a way that we could hopefully rein in our military defense budget? That's the goal, because right now our democracy, we all know it revolves around who has the money. And so if we put money into our hands as the shareholders of this democracy, then we can start retaking our government and make it work better for us. So I'd be thrilled with that debate format, because this is very much the core set of values and ideas to my campaign.
And if I could, one other follow-up. You come from the corporate world and you understand that world quite well. Part of what drives the disparity, as you said, in cash on hand is that the very powerful interests in this country are the people with a lot of money. And you talk about, being able to solve some of the issues of poverty by pulling money from tech. Well, those are powerful lobbies with a lot of influence in Washington and a lot of control over our politics. So how do you break that cycle, and how do you increase the power of the 140 million people who don't have the cash versus the people with a lot of money?
Well, that's one reason why I'm so thrilled with the progress of my campaign. My average donation is only $20, so my fans are even cheaper than Bernie's. But I don't owe anyone anything, and so the goal is to try and fix the economy so it works for us. And I would suggest that's the sort of lightning bolt you need to sort of shock our system to start changing the rules of the economy so that they actually are a trickle-up economy from people, families, and communities up. And then you can change the balance so it's not just the moneyed interests that win, Joy, it's the people of this country. But there, unfortunately, I do not see a realistic way to do that does not involve a political revolution, a victory at the top, and then a groundswell of support around this idea of a dividend. One thing I'm thrilled about, though, is that there's bipartisan support for a dividend. And as your president in 2021, the Democrats and progressives will be so thrilled to have beaten Donald Trump that they'll be like, it's dividend time, let's make children and families stronger. But then we can get some of the Republicans and conservatives who represent rural areas to say, look, this actually helps rural Americans. It helps areas that have been devastated by automation in Ohio and Michigan. And then we don't need 81% of Congress to pass a dividend. We only need 51%. We get that dividend across, and then we can change everything.
All right.
So today we are releasing Poor People's Moral Budget. Everybody's got a right to live. And in it, we're talking about what's it going to take for us to invest in our future and in the demands that this campaign has come up with. And what we're suggesting is that if we cut military spending and actually make this country more secure, if we invest knowing that we'll get more money for those investments, and if we tax those who can afford to pay those taxes the most and not the poor, that we could, in fact, not just lift up the 140 million poor people, but the vast majority of people in this country. Can you talk a little bit about how you propose to impact not just poor people, not just middle-class people, not just business people, but what's it going to take for us to really take seriously these real problems of the lack of living wages, the lack of health care, hospitals closing, and have a whole solution, not siloed solutions, but a whole solution to come to terms with those realities?
No. So here's the beauty of it, is that if we put this money into our hands, we end up getting that money back. And so I was with a corrections officer in New Hampshire who said we should pay people to stay out of jail because we spend so much when they're in jail. We're going to save billions of dollars on incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care just by making our people stronger and healthier. One study said that you would improve GDP, you would increase GDP by $700 billion a year just on the basis of better health and education outcomes if you were to relieve child poverty in this country. We would create over 2 million new jobs because all this money that we have would go into our local communities over and over again. It would go to tutoring for our kids and car repairs we've been putting off and the occasional night out and the hardware store. So that this is, again, even us in this room, we start thinking, where are we going to get the money? Let's get it from the military. Let's get it from some other program. It's like, we put the money in our hands, we're just going to get it back over and over again. And so that's one of the things that, this is really the mindset of abundance even for us. Are we spending too much in the military? Of course we are. $750 billion that we know of on threats that do not actually apply to us in the current era. 100%, we need to take some of that money and move it elsewhere. But this mindset, this economy of abundance, this human-centered economy would actually invest in ourselves, and we'd get the money back over and over and over again.
Very quickly, with the last couple of remaining minutes, you've been very successful in terms of, as you said, as a virtual unknown to most people in the country, using grassroots techniques, using online techniques to get yourself out there. How would you, and how does your campaign plan to use those same techniques to encourage people who are poor to vote? We know the largest group of non-voters are people who are poor and low income, particularly poor and low income people of color, but also white low income people do not vote. How do you change that?
Well, I was inspired by the words of a rapper in Atlanta about me in the campaign. He said, "I don't know who Andrew Yang is, but he wants to give me $1,000 a month." So if you get that word out to people where they think that's a reality, then we can get folks who do not think politics applies to them because they're just like putting, one foot in front of the other. It's most of us, putting one foot in front of the other, just fighting for that next month. And then you say, hey, vote. They're like, whatever, it's not gonna matter to me. It's like, yo, like he actually wants to put cash money into everyone's hands. He wants to humanize the economy. They'll still think it's too good to be true until they turn on that TV and see me standing next to Joe Biden on June 27th. Then they'll say, what, the Asian man's for real. He's just growing and growing and growing. I've got almost 130,000 donors right now. I've qualified for the debates not just June, July, but September as well. I'm gonna be here the whole way. And if we wake up America to the fact that this is a real possibility, we can energize folks who do not think politics matters right now.
Well, we're hoping for the day in this campaign when people say, you know what, I'm gonna vote for them, whoever them is, and that person, because I know if they get in, they're never going to ignore the 140 million poor people. They're going to pass living wages. They're going to pass more programs for the poor. They're going to take money out of, the false money out of the money we don't need to be put in military and put it in the infrastructure and developing communities. They're going to guarantee health care. They're going to stop voter suppression. They're going to call it out. They're not going to use code words like we have to get working people as though black people aren't working, Latinos aren't working. They're going to talk about all people everywhere. They're going to deal with ecological devastation, and they're going to say that it is somehow inconsistent with who we say we are as a nation to continue to have conversations about the wealthy, the middle class, and not have fixing the issue of poverty at the center of our national narrative and national discussion. And we're looking forward to when that day comes.
Thank you very much. Andrew Yang, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you for all you do. You're inspiring. Thank you.